Every lie leaves a mark. Every fortune leaves a footprint. You just have to know where to look. Welcome to Paper Trail Studios. We don't just tell you what happened. We investigate the evidence. From corporate greed to historical mysteries, we bring the biggest stories to life with a unique cinematic style. Don't just watch the story, follow the evidence. Subscribe to Paper Trail Studios.
You know the story. A guy scams America out of hundreds of millions, does less than 2 years in a cushy prison, and then Hollywood makes him a global icon. It's almost unbelievable, but it's the true story of Jordan Belfort, the man who got rich, got caught, and then got rich all over again by selling the story of how he got caught.
And to really get this, you have to start right here, with his mindset. This quote, it's not an apology, not even close. It's a justification. It's the belief that drove every single thing he did, and it really sets the stage for, well, for everything that's about to unfold. So where does a guy like this come from? Well, it didn't start in some fancy Wall Street office. It started on a local beach in Queens. See, Belfort's insane ambition wasn't something he learned. It was basically baked into his DNA from the very beginning.
Think about it. At 16 years old, when most of us were just trying to pass our driver's test, this kid was pulling in 20 grand in a single summer. He wasn't just scooping ice, he built a little business, a system. This was the first real sign that he had this obsessive, all-consuming drive for wealth. Okay, so this moment is just legendary. Belfort actually enrolls in dental school thinking, it's a safe path to a good income. But on day one, the very first day, the dean gets up and says this. And what does Belfort do? He literally stands up, walks right out the door, and never looks back. He wasn't there to make a comfortable living. He was there to get rich, period.
So his next big idea was a door-to-door meat and seafood business, and it failed, spectacularly. But what he learned from that failure was everything. He had this epiphany. Even when the steaks were bad, he could still sell them. He realized his real talent wasn't in the product, it was in the pitch. The product itself was completely irrelevant.
And that superpower, that realization, is what finally took him to Wall Street. He gets a legit job, but then the 1987 Black Monday crash hits, and he's fired. For most people, that's the end of the road. For Belfort, it was the biggest opportunity of his life. He stumbles into this wild west of finance, penny stocks. We're talking zero regulation, sketchy companies, and the real kicker, a massive 50% commission. It was the perfect playground for a guy who could sell anything.
So, he'd found his kingdom. Now it was time to build the empire. He teams up with his buddy Danny Peroche, and they create the firm that would become infamous for all the wrong reasons, Stratton Oakmont.
And this right here perfectly sums up their entire philosophy. The name, Stratton Oakmont, sounds so prestigious, right? Like it's been around for a century. But the reality? It was a chaotic boiler room in a Long Island strip mall. It was all a facade, right from the name on the front door.
So how did they pull it off? Well, Belfort didn't hire a bunch of Ivy Leaguers. No way. He hired dropouts, hustlers from the neighborhood, guys who were hungry and, let's just say, morally flexible. He taught them his straight-line sales script, which was basically a psychological steamroller designed to just crush any objection. And who'd they target? Not the rich guys. They went after working-class folks, teachers, mechanics, you name it, selling them this incredible dream of getting rich quick.
All right, this brings us to the engine room of the whole scam. You have to understand, Stratton Oakmont wasn't really a brokerage firm. It was a machine designed for one and only one purpose, the pump and dump. So what is a pump and dump? It's actually brutally simple. You and your buddies secretly buy a ton of worthless stock for pennies a share. Then you unleash your sales guys to create this storm of hype, just totally false, misleading hype, to drive the price way up. That's the pump. Once everybody else buys in and the price is sky high, you sell all of your shares at once, the dump, and you walk away with a fortune, leaving everyone else holding worthless stock. And this was their exact playbook. They just ran it over and over and over again. They'd buy up huge chunks of some obscure company, unleash their army of brokers to pump the price to the moon, and then, right at the peak, they'd dump everything. The stock would crash to zero, and they'd just move on to the next one. Now, to keep this machine running 24/7, Belfort created this insane cult-like atmosphere. It was a mix of greed, fear, and a twisted kind of loyalty, all fueled by just unbelievable excess. I mean, the stories are wild. The office was a complete circus. If you were a top seller, you were treated like a god. But if you weren't performing, you were publicly humiliated. It wasn't a workplace, it was a gladiator pit.
But here's the thing about an empire built on lies and chaos: it can't last. The very culture that made Stratton Oakmont so successful was also what was going to tear it apart. The fall wasn't a matter of if, but when.
And just look at how fast it all unraveled. The SEC starts sniffing around in '94. Then, a couple years later, in this haze of ego and drugs, he literally sinks his own massive yacht in a storm. A few months after that, boom, the FBI raids the office. But even then, he couldn't stop, illegally wiring millions to Switzerland. By 1998, the game was up.
I mean, this wasn't just white-collar crime anymore. It was turning into something out of a mob movie. He was using shell companies, Swiss banks. He was even paying people to smuggle stacks of cash into Europe, literally sewn into their clothes. He called it asset protection. The FBI called it money laundering.
So how'd they finally nail him? Well, FBI agent Gregory Coleman was relentless. But the real nail in the coffin? It came from the inside. The same brokers that Belfort had made into millionaires started cooperating, wearing wires, turning over records, not because it was the right thing to do, but to save their own skin. Turns out, that loyalty he built was only as deep as the money. So, you'd think that's the end of the story, right? Arrested, facing decades behind bars? But for Jordan Belfort, getting caught was just the beginning of his next, and maybe his most profitable, act.
22 months. For a scam that ripped off thousands of people and made hundreds of millions of dollars, that's how much time Jordan Belfort actually served in prison. He cooperated, he gave up his partners, and in return, he got one of the lightest sentences you can imagine.
Prison is a pretty generous word for it. It was a minimum security camp. No cells, no fences. He played a lot of tennis. And it was there that his cellmate, get this, comedian Tommy Chung from Cheech and Chong, heard all his crazy stories and told him, man, you got to write this stuff down. So he did.
The contrast here is just staggering. It's tough to look at. On one side, you have Belfort, who turns his crime spree into a best-selling book and a Hollywood blockbuster. And on the other side, you have thousands of his victims, people who lost their life savings, their retirement, and have seen almost none of the money they were supposed to get back.
And that brings us to today. He's not hiding. He's on a stage. He travels the world as a motivational speaker, teaching his sales techniques. And he calls himself the Wolf of Wall Street, not as a mark of shame, but as a brand. He has successfully monetized his own crime story.
This quote just says it all, doesn't it? It perfectly captures his second act. He didn't just get away with it. He took the very story of his fraud, packaged it up, and sold it back to the world for millions. He turned his conviction into a commodity.
And that leaves us with the most uncomfortable question in this whole story. Remember what he said, I was greedy, but so is everybody else. And maybe that's why this story resonates. Why did so many of us root for the bad guy in the movie? Why are we, as a culture, so fascinated with outlaws like him? That's the part of the story that isn't just about Jordan Belfort, it's about us.